Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, we'll be discussing what is it like interviewing at a Fang company. I'll specifically be talking about my experiences interviewing at Fang companies and kind of giving you a broad overview of what you can expect when you go into a Fang interview. All right, so in my short career, I've done a few Fang interviews so far. I actually interviewed at Amazon twice. I recently did an interview at Snapchat, which I'm not sure you would really consider that a Fang company, but it is a big company, so I guess we can sort of lump them together. The style of interview is very similar. So for me, the bulk of my Fang interviewing experience has come from Amazon. I actually interviewed there twice. So the first time I didn't get it, second time was the charm, I guess. So that ended up working out for me. But usually, if you interview at a company like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Netflix, whatever, the interviewing style is pretty much the same all across the board. Maybe with slight differences here and there, but pretty much what I'm about to tell you is everything you really need to know. And so let's start off by discussing how a Fang interview differs from a normal software engineering interview. In a normal software engineering interview, you essentially go in and you meet usually with one person, sometimes two people from the team, like a hiring manager, senior engineer, just a fellow software engineer that you could possibly be working with. So you just meet with a small pool of people. Sometimes they might cycle in and out, to have like one-on-ones with you, but for the most part, in small companies, it's a pretty simple straight shot. You come in, they ask you about your background, a couple maybe behavioral questions to warm up, and then after 5 or 10 minutes, they ask you an algorithm question, and then you do that for the bulk of the time, and then at the very end, for like 5 minutes, they say, "Do you want to ask any questions?" And then after that, usually it's just one interview, and then you're on your way, and that's it. And then you have to wait however long until you hear back whether it's a yes or no. And so that's what it's like interviewing at a normal software engineering company. You guys are probably all familiar with that. It's kind of the same for internships as well. So how does Fang differ? So Fang, it's obviously no secret. Fang companies are significantly larger than small startups or mid-sized companies. Google, Amazon, they collectively have hundreds of thousands of employees. You're operating at a scale at which you've probably never experienced before. And so the recruiting efforts need to be a little bit more rigorous, because if they only did like normal software engineering interviews, think about it. So you have large companies which have probably hundreds of thousands of applicants every single year. Sure, you can interview them for like a 1 hour interview, just do a quick one and maybe hire them there. But with big companies, they want the best of the best and they're willing to pay for it. And so I just don't think that if you're interviewing someone, you can really get all the information you need to hire them at such a high level if you're only doing like a 1 hour interview. And so with Fang, it's different. So the way they do it at Fang, or at least Fang style interviews, is you have to do a series of interviews. And I'm not going to lie, it's extremely rigorous. Usually on the low end, it's like 4 interviews. On the high end, it's like 6, possibly even 7 interviews. But usually for me, it's like 5, 6 in my experience. And for the most part, each of the interviews is like a normal software engineering interview. You're just doing it back to back to back. And so, you may think, oh, that's not so bad. But if you're spending pretty much like 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours, like doing an interview back to back, it's pretty exhausting and you're worn out by the end of the day. Your mental capacity just isn't all the way there. Like it's tough, believe me. You have to prepare a long time for it. And so, so when you go into an interview, at least for me, I'll start talking about what it was like with Amazon. So when I interviewed at Amazon, I applied. I just sent my resume out, and surprisingly, they got back to me, and they're like, "Okay, we want to interview you." And so the first step was a sort of technical test. So what they did was they sent me a link to like this. They sent me a link to a test, and essentially I clicked it, and I think like it was 90 minutes to solve 2 questions, and then I had like an extra 10 minutes to like answer some behavioral questions or like talk about my background. And this is all digital, like it was all online. I didn't have to talk to anyone. So it's essentially just like a timed coding competition you can think of. And so I did that. I was able to successfully my first try, I got the first question right. Second try, I got like halfway done, and then I wrote a note like how I would do the question if I had more time, and then I just moved on from there. Then I got a call back because apparently they liked my results, and so they interviewed me with a phone screen. And so this is typical with a lot of companies. Usually, you won't have like the tests that I just did, but you will have a phone screen of some sort. So the phone screen usually is pretty easy. It's just like they ask lower level questions, or I guess like easy questions, and they just want to get to know more about your background, just to see if you'd be a fit and if you're even like worth bringing on site. And so that's just sort of like a small vetting process. They just want to make sure like, could you actually be a valuable person to the organization, to the company, and could you bring a lot of value? So that's pretty normal. I think even normal companies have phone screens, so nothing new there. And then after my phone screen, we scheduled an onsite. You talk with your recruiter, you schedule an onsite, and they can work with you. They're usually pretty flexible. Like I think I scheduled my onsite like roughly a month in advance, and that's totally normal. With Fang interviews, recruiters know that you're going to need to spend a lot of time preparing. So don't shy away from that. Don't feel like you need to rush into the interview because it's best to just take your time and make sure that you study correctly, brush up on all of the foundational stuff like data structures and algorithms, all that good stuff. Make sure you have all your ducks in a row and you're confident beyond a reasonable doubt. And make sure that you're just really confident. Not necessarily study and wait till you're ready because you'll never feel ready, but just keep studying and making sure that you have all your bases covered. And then eventually at some point, you just got to set the date and go for it. So usually if you are a seasoned professional, like if you've worked in the industry for a couple years, like even for me, I've been working for like 3 years. So when I prepare for interviews, I usually don't spend more than 2 months preparing for one, just because at that point I don't really see it as, I feel like I'm just over preparing at that point. So just know your limits. So it's important to really be in tune with how much you know and how much studying you think you need to do. So yeah, just be cognizant of that, because if you're newer to the field, like if you're just fresh from college and you're interviewing and learning stuff, I would say give yourself 3 months to like really brush up on everything and make sure that you're in a good state to start doing technical interviews, especially if you're interviewing at Fang. Don't give yourself too much time, because at that point it's just like, I feel like you're just, like I said earlier, like you're just over preparing, and at some point you're just going to need to do it. So I'd say 2 months, set the deadline, and then just go ahead and study every single day, be consistent. All right, so now you have your date set for your onsite, you're studying, you're ready. And so now when you actually get to your onsite, what usually happens is, let's just say with the example of my Amazon interview, I did, I believe, 6 interviews. And so when you go into your interviews, they're usually 1 hour long, and they are, for the most part, just algorithm data structures, typical like, leak code style questions they ask you to, write on the whiteboard. Nothing new there. With bigger companies, I find that they do lots of like leak code medium hard problems. Not necessarily hard. I don't really see too many hard problems, but I see like usually in the range of like medium hard. So just another pro tip, if you want to study on leak code, I'd say just focus mostly on mediums and put less emphasis on being good at hard problems. I mean, if you can do both, great. But I'd say if you get good at medium problems, that sets you up better for a Fang interview than if you just tried focusing on hard problems and solving those. You definitely have to work your way up to it. So each of my interviews had an objective. So, some of them are just algorithm and data structure knowledge, just seeing if I have those fundamentals. Some of them are specifically just for behavioral questions. I believe my second interview of the day at Amazon was only for behavioral questions. That's all they asked me. No coding questions, nothing. It's just they asked me like 20 different behavioral questions. They listened to my answer, and I'll make a video on how to like break down and answer behavioral questions, because that's a whole different video topic in and of itself. But yeah, just be prepared. It's not all technical questions. There are some times where you will come in and they'll just ask you a bunch of behavioral questions, and then that would be that specific interview. Other times, if you're applying for like a domain specific role, like let's say for example you want to apply for an iOS or Android developer position or something niche, they might have an interview that's domain specific. So they might ask you questions like, you know, keeping with the example of iOS, it'd be like, oh, how does a retain cycle work? Or can you explain to me the app hierarchy or app lifecycle? Just kind of iOS specific questions to really test your knowledge in that one domain specific area, because they want to know that if you're an iOS developer, do you know like basic iOS developer stuff? So there's that too. I know at Google that's really popular, so they do domain specific interviews there. It's not always the case. Usually, I feel like domain specific interviews can be left out, but just know that it is a thing. So be prepared in that specific stack that you're working with. If a job is specifically asking for some technology that obviously spend time studying and learning it in and out and can speak to it at least. So we have algorithm data structure questions. We have behavioral questions, domain specific knowledge. What's next? For a lot of interviews, we do a lot of system design. So even like at Amazon, I was being interviewed for L4, which is essentially entry level, like college level, couple years of experience. Like it's the entry level base position for a software engineer at Amazon. Even in those interviews, they expected me to do system design. So it's becoming increasingly common in big companies to ask these types of questions. So that is something you are also going to have to spend time preparing for. And there are a lot of resources on the internet. But one of the things is, one of the saving graces that you have is if you're entry level and you don't do so well in system design, I don't think it'll be held too much against you, because obviously you're relatively new to the field. So as long as you're not completely clueless, I think it's not going to be held too much against you. But just know that system design is something that you probably should study for if you're interviewing at these big companies. And just always clarify with your recruiter like about the interview process, because if you ask them, they're going to be transparent with you. Ask them like, for this particular company, do you guys focus on system design? For this role, will there be system design? And more often than not, they will tell you. And so don't just blindly focus on system design just because you heard me say so. Like, ask your recruiter and confirm, like, is system design something I will have to worry about? And then kind of go from there. And then one last thing. So at big companies, there's more of an emphasis on a certain culture. And I guess maybe this might be because I was in Amazon. And so in Amazon, we have something called leadership principles. And so that's something you also have to kind of like bake into your answers. So if they ask you a behavioral question, they kind of want to apply to a certain leadership principle. I'm not sure if other companies do this. I know with Google, they have like certain, like, I guess, like tenets or something. And so you have to, when you answer a behavioral question, you want it to be in line with that particular company's culture, because you can give an awesome answer to a behavioral question, but if it's directly opposed to like what the company's mission is or culture is and like what they believe in, then it's not going to make you look good. It's a great way to cost yourself the job, essentially. So always be cognizant of the company's culture and try to weave that into your answers, because for Amazon, they focus on technical and whether you're going to be a culture fit. And if you're really good technically speaking, but if you're just a bad culture fit, they will not hire you. So having good answers to behavioral questions that are in line with the company's culture is really the way to stand out in these interviews. And so that's usually it. You usually do, like I said, 4 to 6 of these back to back. In the middle of the day, you usually have a lunch interview. And this isn't really so much as an interview. It's just sort of like to get to know the team, ask whatever questions you want. Nothing you say in the lunch interview will be held against you. So it's just kind of a time for you to just like get to know more about the company in a more relaxed environment. They usually pay for your lunch. So it's nice. It's just sort of like also a little break too, because I mean, if you're doing like, 3 interviews and then in the morning and like 3 interviews in the afternoon, obviously I shouldn't need to tell you it gets pretty exhausting. So this lunch is kind of like for you to like recuperate a little bit. But yeah, so let's just do a quick recap. Interviews that you can expect are typical algorithm data structures, behavioral interviews, system design, meeting with the manager, and then a lunch interview, which is just for you to kind of recuperate and take a little break from back-to-back interviews. So that's usually everything you're going to experience at a typical Fang interview. That's pretty much the gist of it. Like, I think all big interviews at these companies are structured in the same way. So once you interview at one of them, you get pretty familiarized with the process for other companies should you interview at them as well. So, like I was saying, that's pretty much everything you can expect from interviewing at big companies. And so, after everything's said and done, and you're done interviewing, after you've gone through 6 loops of interviews, crazy, you're exhausted. Usually, what happens is, in my experience, the turnaround time from hearing back is pretty fast. I think from Amazon, I heard back in like 2 days, I want to say. I mean, of course, it varies. Like, it's not like a blanket rule that everyone responds super fast. But in my experience, like, it's usually within like a week or something, they tell you like yes or no. So that's kind of nice because then you don't have to sit there and worry like, did I get it? Did I not get it? So they usually get back to you pretty fast. But having said that, that's pretty much all there is to these Fang style interviews at big companies. So yeah, just keep in mind that don't take these interviews lightly. Like if you get an interview at Microsoft, Google, Netflix, Amazon, whatever, make sure that you really take the time to study. Like prioritize that, be consistent. Like even if you only have 30 minutes a day to do it, like just do it. You have to be consistent. Focus on your weak areas. Always be constantly improving. It's just important to keep your skills sharp because you never know when you're going to find yourself in an opportunity like this to accelerate your career and go to a big company. And you always want to make sure that you're prepared. And so make sure you're preparing right and you're studying, but you're not studying too much because you want to make sure that after a certain point, you kind of just go through with it. For better or for worse, you'll never feel ready. So you just kind of have to put a limit to your studying and study well within that time frame. And hopefully you get the job. That's going to be it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.